A man spent 40 years alone on a frozen mountain, building walls around his heart thicker than his cabin walls. Then a letter arrived, offering him a wife he'd never met. He said yes, expecting nothing. What happened next shattered everything he thought he knew about strength, survival, and love. This is the story of Elijah Crow, the mountain man who learned that the hardest thing to survive wasn't the wilderness. It was opening his heart. For nearly 40 years, Elijah Crow lived alone on a mountain that asked for nothing but endurance. His cabin stood surrounded by pine trees like silent guards. Winter arrived early and stayed late. The cold taught him one rule: warmth was earned, never expected. People in the valley called him the mountain man. They said his shoulders were shaped by axes and storms, and his voice was quiet because he had no one to speak to. They treated him like the ridges above, solid, distant, impossible to reach. Nobody wondered about his heart. They assumed it was as hard as the granite beneath his boots. Elijah never argued. He'd learned that needing people could break a man. Solitude felt safer. But as the years piled up, the nights grew longer. The wind sounded louder. The silence pressed in. Then a letter arrived, creased, smelling of ink and dust. Elijah read it twice, not because it was long, but because the words felt foreign in his world. The letter offered an arranged marriage. A woman would come to him. In return, he'd give her a home, food, and safety. It wasn't written like a love story. It was written like a business agreement. Elijah accepted with the same calm he gave a coming storm. It made sense. Loneliness had started echoing louder than the wind, and maybe a woman under his roof would quiet that sound. He didn't allow himself to hope. Hope was dangerous. It made men careless. The letter described her simply: widowed, quiet, used to hardship, willing to come to the mountains for a life that promised little comfort. Elijah folded the paper into his coat pocket. He told himself the arrangement would be fair, even if it was never warm. On the morning she was supposed to arrive, frost clung to everything like thin glass. Elijah stood outside longer than usual, listening for a sound he hadn't heard in years: another human presence. He told himself not to expect much, not to imagine laughter or long talks by the fire. Expectation led to disappointment. When the wagon finally appeared, it looked too small for such a journey. It moved slowly, wheels crunching over frozen ground. Then she stepped down. She wasn't what he expected, small but steady. Her dress was worn but clean, her dark hair pinned neatly despite the rough ride. When she lifted her eyes to meet his, there was no fear, only calm, like she'd already made peace with the life ahead. That calm unsettled him. She introduced herself simply. Her voice was soft but sure. She thanked him for meeting her as if it was kindness, not obligation. Elijah nodded, but words stuck in his throat. He was used to speaking to mountains and wind, not people. He took her bag, and they walked to the cabin. He explained mountain life the way you explain weather: where water was drawn, how fire was kept, which trails were safe, and which could turn deadly. She listened without interrupting. Not once did she complain. Inside, the cabin was tidy but bare, built for function, not comfort. He showed her a small room and said it would be hers. In a steady voice, he told her he expected nothing more than shared work and shared space. No romance, no sweet promises, no illusions. He didn't look at her when he said it. He feared seeing disappointment. But she smiled, not brightly, not foolishly, but with quiet understanding. She said she hadn't come seeking a fairy tale. She came for a place to belong and for a man who kept his word. Those words stayed with him. That night, he lay in bed listening to unfamiliar sounds: soft footsteps, a door closing carefully, the rhythm of another person breathing under his roof. He expected it to annoy him. Instead, for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. Days followed with cautious rhythm. Elijah watched her quietly, expecting mistakes or fear. But she moved through the cabin like someone who'd lived hard enough to know how to adapt. She learned the stove quickly. She treated his tools with respect. When she asked questions, they were thoughtful. Elijah told himself not to look for more, not to notice how she left a mug warming by the fire when he came in from the cold, not to notice how she saw his shoulders stiffen and adjusted the heavier work without a word. This marriage wasn't meant to change him. It was meant to endure. Yet change came anyway, quiet as snow falling in the night. He found himself lingering at the table, listening when she spoke. He noticed the softness in her laughter. He noticed the strength in her silence. One evening, during a howling storm, she asked about the scar on his jaw. Not prying, just wanted to understand. The memory rose before he could push it down. To his own surprise, he started talking. He told her a story he'd never told anyone. She didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix anything. She just listened. When he finished, she thanked him for trusting her. That simple sentence hit harder than it should have. It made him feel something he'd forgotten: warmth. Spring came slowly. Their days filled with work, repairing fences, clearing trails, planting a small garden. Elijah wasn't alone anymore. He watched her hands as she worked. Capable, careful, gentle even with rough tasks. Something stirred inside him. Not just admiration, fear. Admiration pulled you closer. Fear warned what closeness could cost. Then came the day that changed everything. Elijah went farther down the trail to check traps. The ground was slick with hidden ice. He stepped wrong. His boots slid. He fell hard against a rock. Pain shot through him. Blood spread under his shirt. Fear rose, not of death, but of leaving her alone. He forced himself up and stumbled back. When he collapsed in the doorway, she was there instantly. Her gasp wasn't a scream. It was something breaking inside her. Then she moved with calm purpose. She cleaned the wound, pressed cloth against the blood, set his shoulder. Her hands were steady, even while fear shone in her eyes. Recovery forced him into stillness, forced him to accept help. In those quiet days, she spoke more of her past. Her first marriage taught her endurance, not love. She lived years feeling unseen, like a shadow in her own home. That's why she came. Not for happiness, for honesty. A life where silence was real, not fake. Elijah confessed he never expected her to change anything. He planned for survival, not connection. She looked at him, calm and firm. I didn't come to be endured. I came to belong. Those words demanded a choice. Then the mountain tested them. Men from the valley arrived with papers, claiming the land was no longer his. A railroad wanted a route through. They said his claim wasn't valid. Elijah's instinct was to push her away, tell her to leave for safety. The hurt in her eyes cut deep, but she stepped beside him instead. She didn't hide. When the men dismissed her questions, she didn't move. For the first time, Elijah felt relief standing with someone instead of alone. That night, Elijah tried to handle it alone. She laid old documents on the table and told him the truth needed a voice. He told her to leave. She asked if pushing people away was how he handled fear. He realized he stood where he always had, back against the world alone. He looked at her and saw what he would lose. I don't know how to belong to someone, he admitted. I'm not asking for perfection, she said. I'm asking you to stop shutting me out. The next morning, they went down the mountain together. In the valley office, lies cracked under questions. An older man remembered Elijah's filing. Truth surfaced. The threat broke. Outside, Elijah stopped and looked at her. I'm glad you stayed. I never wanted to leave. Summer came. The garden grew. The cabin no longer felt like shelter pressed against the world. It felt like home. Elijah Crow had prepared for a cold, loveless marriage. He expected survival and silence. What he found instead was belonging. On the first cold evening of autumn, they sat by the fire. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but it would soon. Elijah looked at her and felt no fear of the long months ahead. For the first time, winter didn't feel like something to endure. It felt like something to face together. He'd learned the mountain's hardest lesson. The strongest thing a man can do isn't survive alone. It's choose to stay.